On November 29, 1947, the United Nations General Assembly voted to partition Palestine into two states, one Jewish and one Arab, with a special international regime for Jerusalem. But at that moment, the State of Israel did not yet exist on the map. Nor was there an independent state of Palestine within the borders of the British Mandate. The territory was governed by Britain, and that administrative entity itself had only emerged after the First World War. This raises a seemingly simple question. What was there before Israel in 1948? Usually people answer it with a single sentence. But a single sentence almost inevitably distorts the history. To understand what actually existed here before Israel, we need to look not at one name, but at how the political map itself changed several times. If you are interested in Jewish history without slogans or oversimplifications, leave a like and subscribe. Here it is especially important to follow the entire chain to the end, because the final answer will be different from the most obvious one. Let us begin with the map that existed long before the British arrived. At the beginning of the 16th century, this region became part of the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman rule lasted here for roughly 4 centuries, until the First World War. But there is an important detail. On the late Ottoman map, there was no separate sovereign state whose borders matched either the future state of Israel or British Mandatory Palestine. The administrative structure was different. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the territory known in geographical and historical terms as Palestine was divided among several Ottoman administrative units. The Jerusalem district had a special status and reported directly to the central government in Istanbul. The areas around Nablus and Acre were connected to the Beirut vilayet. The boundaries of these districts changed over time. That is why trying to place a modern political map directly over the Ottoman period creates a false picture. This does not mean that the word Palestine did not exist, or that the territory was empty. Arabic-speaking Muslims formed the majority of the population, while Christian and Jewish communities also existed. In the late 19th century, Jewish immigration increased, driven by the Zionist movement and persecution in Europe. This is where the first important correction to the popular question, what country existed before Israel, appears. Before the First World War, the political answer was not Palestine as an independent state, but the Ottoman Empire. At the same time, within that empire, there was a region known as Palestine, as well as a population whose political identities would change rapidly over the following decades. The next transformation of the map did not come through a peaceful administrative reform, but through a world war. The Ottoman Empire entered the First World War on the side of the Central Powers. British forces advanced from Egypt across the Sinai. On October 31, 1917, they captured Beersheba. Gaza fell in November, and in December the British occupied Jerusalem. By the autumn of the following year, Ottoman rule in the region had effectively ended. But even before the final British victory, London made a declaration that would shape everything that followed. On November 2, 1917, Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour announced the British government's support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. The same declaration stated that nothing should be done to prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities. For the Zionist movement, this represented international recognition of the project for a Jewish national home. For the Palestinian Arabs, who formed the majority of the population, growing Jewish immigration created the fear that they might lose their political majority. This contradiction would become the central problem of the mandate. After the war, Britain initially administered the territory as occupied former Ottoman land. Later, the system was formalized internationally. On July 24, 1922, the Council of the League of Nations approved the mandate for Palestine, and in September 1923 it came into force. Britain became the mandatory power, with broad legislative and administrative authority. This is where an entity appears on the map that looks much more like what viewers see in documents in the 1940s, mandatory Palestine. But even here there is a trap. The Mandate was not simply an old country that Britain had renamed. It was a new international legal and administrative structure created after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. The text of the Mandate incorporated provisions of the Balfour Declaration. Britain was required to create conditions for the development of the Jewish national home, facilitate Jewish immigration under certain conditions, and cooperate with the Jewish Agency. At the same time, the Mandate required Britain to protect the civil and religious rights of all inhabitants, regardless of origin or faith, and to encourage the development of institutions of self-government. Even the borders of the Mandate were not what many people today automatically imagine when they hear the word Palestine. The lands east of the Jordan River were placed under separate administration as Transjordan, and the provisions of the Mandate connected with the establishment of the Jewish national home were not applied there. As a result, the political map that emerged after the First World War was already different both from the Ottoman map and from the map that would appear after 1948. Under the British Mandate, Palestinian citizenship existed. Arabs, Jews, and members of other communities could all be citizens of the Mandate territory. The name Palestine was official. So the statement that Palestine did not exist at all is incorrect. But it is equally inaccurate to treat the Mandate as a fully sovereign state that was simply renamed Israel. Now the map becomes even more complicated, because not only the government but also the population was changing. According to the first British census of 1922, Palestine had approximately 752,000 inhabitants. The Jewish population numbered around 84,000. By the end of 1946, the United Nations estimated the population at approximately 1,846,000. About 1,203,000 Arabs, 608,000 Jews, and 35,000 people belonging to other groups. The population grew through both natural increase and migration. The Jewish Yishuv expanded rapidly. Schools, trade unions, representative institutions, medical organizations, and economic institutions were strengthened. Tel Aviv developed into a major Jewish center, while the Jewish Agency received an official role within the Mandate system. At the same time, the Palestinian Arab national movement was developing. Its leaders demanded an end to, or severe restrictions on, Jewish immigration, and insisted on the political rights of the Arab majority. By the 1930s, the question was therefore no longer simply who governs the territory. It had become something else. What kind of state would emerge after the British left, and who would hold the political majority within it? We have now reached the middle of this story. If you value this kind of analysis, where the map is explained through documents and actual political decisions, write in the comments which period in the history of this land deserves a separate video. And support the video with a like or a subscription. During the 1920s, there were outbreaks of intercommunal violence. In 1936, a major Arab revolt began against British rule and Jewish immigration. It continued until 1939. Britain responded with large-scale police and military measures, while the Yishuv strengthened its own security structures. The British increasingly understood that the original formula of the Mandate was not producing a political solution. In 1937, the Peel Commission became the first official British body to propose partitioning the territory into an Arab state and a Jewish state. The plan was never implemented, but the concept of partition had already appeared on the diplomatic map 10 years before the United Nations vote. 2 years later, London changed course. The White Paper of 1939 stated that British policy did not aim to turn all of Palestine into a Jewish state, and proposed the establishment, within 10 years, of an independent Palestine in which Arabs and Jews would participate jointly in government. At the same time, Jewish immigration was limited to approximately 75,000 people over the following 5 years. Any further immigration would depend on the consent of the Arab population. For the Jewish movement, the timing was particularly devastating. The Nazi regime was already in power in Europe, persecution of Jews was intensifying, and soon the Holocaust would begin. The restriction of immigration was therefore seen by many Zionist leaders as Britain abandoning its earlier commitments precisely when refuge had become a matter of life and death. Arab leaders, for their part, also rejected the British proposal as a final settlement, because they demanded more rapid recognition of independence and an end to Zionist immigration. After the Holocaust, the issue became even more urgent. Survivors tried to reach Palestine, including in defiance of British immigration restrictions. Britain intercepted ships and placed some illegal immigrants in camps, including on Cyprus, while Jewish underground organizations intensified their struggle against the British administration. By the mid-1940s, Britain could no longer reconcile the demands of the two sides. Arab leaders rejected the continuation of large-scale Jewish immigration, while the Yishuv, after the Holocaust, demanded unrestricted Jewish immigration and an independent state. In February 1947, the British government decided to refer the Palestine question to the United Nations. The United Nations Special Committee on Palestine examined the situation and recommended ending the mandate. The majority of the committee supported partition into two states, linked by an economic union. A minority preferred a federal model. And this brings us back to November 29, 1947. Resolution 181 received 33 votes in favour, 13 against, and 10 abstentions. The plan called for the establishment of an Arab state and a Jewish state, while Jerusalem and its surrounding area were to be placed under a special international regime. The Jewish Agency accepted the principle of partition, even though the proposed borders were complicated and fragmented. Arab representatives and the Arab states rejected the plan, arguing that it was unjust and violated the right of the Arab majority to determine the country's political future for itself. After the vote, violence between Jewish and Arab forces rapidly escalated into the civil phase of the war, even before the British withdrawal. And only now can we give the full answer to the central question. 3 seconds. Immediately before the creation of Israel, the territory on which the new state emerged was under British mandatory administration and was officially called Palestine. But mandatory Palestine was not an independent sovereign state that simply changed its name to Israel. It was a territory under British administration, created after the First World War from former Ottoman lands. And before the British period, most of these lands had for centuries belonged to the Ottoman Empire and were divided among several different administrative districts. That is why both extremely short answers, "Before Israel there was Palestine" and "Before Israel there was nothing," conceal the most important part of the history. Palestine existed as a historical and geographical name, later as an official mandate territory and a legal administrative entity. Arabs, Jews, and other communities lived there. But immediately before 1948, it was not a fully independent country with a sovereign government that Israel simply replaced. On May 14, 1948, several hours before the British mandate officially ended, David Ben-Gurion read the declaration establishing the State of Israel. The mandate ended at midnight. The following day, the armies of neighboring Arab states entered the war. The United Nations partition plan was never implemented in its original form, and the lines that emerged after the war were different from the map approved in November 1947. That is why the map before Israel is not a story of one ready-made state simply replacing another. It is a story of the collapse of an empire, the British Mandate, two national movements, migration, competing political projects, conflict, and an attempted international partition. For Jewish history, this is especially important. The State of Israel did not emerge in an empty space or outside an existing society. It grew out of the Yishuv, which for decades had been building political, social, educational, and economic institutions within mandatory Palestine, and out of the Zionist movement, which sought national self-determination. At the same time, an Arab majority lived on the same territory, with its own society and national movement, which also claimed the right to self-determination. Without understanding both of these realities, it is impossible to understand either 1948 or why the question of the map remains so sensitive today. The biggest mistake is to search for one previous country on the territory of modern Israel with exactly the same borders. No such country existed on the eve of 1948. There was mandatory Palestine under British administration. Before that, there were Ottoman administrative territories, and between them came war, international decisions, and the gradual creation of new political borders. If this video helps separate the historical map from modern political slogans, subscribe, leave a like, and share it. And in the comments, tell us which moment you consider the most important. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the British Mandate, or the United Nations decision to partition Palestine.